Elara Vance stood outside the towering obsidian doors of the Ironreach Citadel, her fingers trembling as she smoothed the fabric of a gown that smelled of cedar and another woman's perfume. She had spent the last 40 minutes pacing the limestone corridors, rehearsing a lie so intricate she had almost begun to believe it herself. She didn't know that the man sitting on the other side of those doors possessed a sense of smell so acute he could detect the pheromones of fear from a league away. More importantly, she had no idea that by the time the moon peaked over the frostbound peaks, her soul would be tethered to a bargain that would dismantle the power structure of the three kingdoms. The throne room was not a place for the likes of her. It was a cathedral of raw, unadulterated power where treaties were etched in bone and the map of the world was redrawn with a single growl from the man at its center. Elara took a breath, the corset of her borrowed midnight blue velvet dress pinching her ribs until it hurt. She stepped forward as the guards pushed the doors open, the hinges screaming like dying spirits. The room was a vast expanse of black marble and flickering torchlight, ending at a dais where Silas Vane, the Alpha King, sat upon a throne of volcanic glass. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply watched her with amber eyes that held the weight of 1,000 winters. Before we get into the heart of this dangerous bargain, please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps me bring more of these epic romantasy stories to life every single week. Elara's heart hammered against her sternum, a frantic, rhythmic thrumming that she was certain every wolf in the room could hear. There were 6 of them, high-ranking alphas, the king's inner circle, and they watched her with the predatory curiosity of hunters watching a rabbit hop into a snare. She reached the center of the room and attempted a curtsy. It was a fumbling, desperate thing. Her knees wobbled, and she had to catch the heavy velvet of her skirt to keep from toppling onto the cold stone. "Your Majesty?" she began, but the words caught in her throat, coming out as a strangled rasp. One of the advisors, a woman with silver hair braided like a warrior's helm, pressed her lips together in silent judgment. Silas Vane remained motionless, his jawline sharp enough to cut the very air he breathed. His dark hair was swept back from a face that looked like it had been sculpted by a god who wanted to warn the world about the price of beauty. He was terrifyingly still, a coiled spring of muscle and suppressed violence. Elara had practiced a speech about a stolen family heirloom and a fraudulent land deed, a story meant to evoke pity. But standing under the crushing weight of his gaze, the lie felt like ash. So, she did the one thing she hadn't prepared for. She told the truth. "I need a husband for a week to humiliate the man who broke my family," she blurted out. The silence that followed was so absolute, she could hear the logs hissing in the great hearths 50 feet away. Silas didn't laugh. He didn't even sneer. He simply leaned forward, his amber eyes glowing with a sudden sharp interest. "Repeat that," he commanded. His voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in Elara's marrow. "My former betrothed, Julian Thorne," she said, her voice growing stronger as the desperation took hold. "He is marrying the daughter of the High Duke of the Southern Reach in 6 days. He sent me an invitation not out of kindness, but as a final insult. He wants the entire court to see me standing there alone, the seamstress he discarded, the girl whose father's business he ruined. He wants to use my presence to show the world how far he has risen and how far I have fallen. I cannot go alone. I will not give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. But my family is gone. My friends have all defected to his side to save their own skins, and I have no one. I need someone the Southern Court wouldn't dare mock. I need someone they fear." Silas stood up then. And the sheer scale of him was overwhelming. He was a mountain of a man, broad-shouldered and lethal, his presence rewriting the very gravity of the room. "And you believe the Alpha King of the North is your personal instrument of vengeance?" he asked, descending the dais with a slow, predatory grace. "I served your mother," Elara said, the words rushing out. "I was her personal lace-maker for 3 years before the winter fever took her. She was the only person who was ever kind to me in this citadel. She told me once that if I ever truly feared for my honor, the House of Vane would remember my service. I am calling in that debt, Your Majesty. Just one night. You don't even have to speak to me. Just stand by my side and let them see that I am not the tragedy Julian Thorne says I am." Silas stopped just inches from her. He smelled of cedar, so cold rain, and something darker. Something that made the animal part of Elara's brain want to both flee and kneel. He looked down at her, his gaze traveling over her pale face and the defiance she was barely holding together. "I will not be your date, Elara Vance," he said, and her heart shattered into a million pieces. Of course. It was madness to ask. She turned to leave, her dignity in ribbons, when his voice stopped her. "I'll go as your husband." She spun back, her eyes wide. "What?" "The Southern Lords have been badgering me for a political alliance through marriage for 3 years, Silas explained, circling her like a wolf inspecting a new curiosity. "If I arrive with a wife already claimed, the chatter ends. You need a shield to protect your pride. I need a wall to stop their nagging. We tell the court we married in secret months ago. So we attend the wedding. We break Julian Thorne's spirit, and then we part ways with a quiet annulment. But there are conditions." "Name them," Elara breathed, her mind racing. "You do not flinch when I touch you," Silas murmured, leaning down so his lips were a hair's breadth from her ear. A wife who recoils from her husband is a lie the court will sniff out in seconds. From this moment until the wedding is over, you belong to the House of Vane. You will eat at my table, sleep in my wing, and wear my mark. Do we have a bargain?" Elara looked into those amber eyes and saw a different kind of danger. Not the danger of a king, but the danger of a man who got exactly what he wanted. "Agreed," she whispered. The next 6 days were a blur of transformation that stripped away every remnant of the girl Elara used to be. She was moved into the royal wing, in a place of gold-leafed stone and silk tapestries. Silas's chief advisor, Lady Mara, took charge of her education with the efficiency of a drill sergeant. Elara was bathed in oils, her hair treated with rare herbs until it shone like polished mahogany, and her wardrobe was replaced with gowns that cost more than a merchant's fleet. But the most significant change was Silas. He was everywhere. He insisted on taking his meals with her, watching her move, correcting her posture, and teaching her the intricate, lethal dance of Southern politics. On the 3rd night, he presented her with a ring. It was a heavy band of white gold set with a blood-red ruby that looked like a drop of congealed fire. "It belonged to my mother," he said, sliding it onto her finger. His hand was warm and rough with calluses, his touch surprisingly gentle. Said she was a woman of common birth who held her head higher than any duchess. Wear it with the same steel she had. Elara stared at the ring, then up at him. "Why are you doing this, Silas? It's more than just a political shield. You could have picked any noble woman for this ruse." Silas looked out the window at the swirling snow. "Because the noble women of the North are born into power, Elara. They don't know what it's like to fight for a single inch of ground. You walked into my throne room with nothing but a borrowed dress and a debt, and you looked me in the eye. That kind of courage is rare. I find it intriguing." The word hung in the air, heavy with a tension that hadn't been there before. As they practiced dancing in the great hall, the rehearsed proximity began to feel less like a performance and more like a necessity. Elara found herself leaning into the heat of his body, and Silas's hand stayed on her waist a second longer than the steps required. By the time they reached the southern reach for the wedding of Julian Thorne and Lady Lessa, the air between them was charged with a static that threatened to ignite at any moment. The Thorne estate was a sprawling palace of white marble and manicured gardens, currently swarming with the elite of the southern court. As the royal carriage, bearing the Drakemere seal, pulled up to the entrance, a hush fell over the assembled guests. Silas stepped out first, looking like a god of death in his black-on-black formal leathers. He turned and offered his hand to Elara. She took a deep breath, adjusted the skirts of her crimson silk gown, a dress designed to look like a spilled glass of wine, and stepped out. The whispers began instantly. Is that the Vance girl? No, it can't be. Look at the ring. The Alpha King? Married? They walked through the ballroom doors, and the effect was like a physical shockwave. The orchestra faltered, and conversations died mid-sentence. At the far end of the hall, near the flower-laden altar, Julian Thorne stood in his white silk finery. He looked every bit the golden boy until his eyes landed on Elara. The wine glass in his hand shattered, the shards cutting his palm, but he didn't seem to notice. Elara felt a surge of triumph so sharp it almost made her dizzy. But it was Silas who truly sold the lie. He leaned down, his lips brushing her temple, and whispered, "Don't look at him yet. Look at me. Let him see that he doesn't exist in your world anymore." Elara turned her gaze to Silas, and for a moment, she forgot the ballroom, the whispers, and the revenge. She saw the flickers of gold in his amber eyes, and the way his expression softened when he looked at her. It felt real. It felt more real than anything Julian had ever given her. Lord Calloway, the bride's father, was the first to recover. He hurried forward, his face a mask of practiced diplomacy. "Your Majesty, we had no idea the North would grace us with such a presence. And this must be your companion?" Silas's grip on Elara's waist tightened, a possessive, territorial gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. "This is my wife, Queen Elara," Silas said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "We preferred a private ceremony, away from the prying eyes of the courts." "I trust your hospitality extends to the Queen of the North?" Calloway stammered an affirmative, his eyes darting to Elara's ring, and then to Julian, who was looking more and more like a man facing a firing squad. The ceremony was a blur of gold and white, but for Elara, the only thing that mattered was the weight of Silas's hand on hers. During the vows, she watched Julian exchange rings with Lady Lessa, a girl who looked far too young and far too frightened. Elara waited for the old pain to strike, the familiar ache of being unwanted. It never came. Instead, she felt a profound sense of pity for the girl at the altar. Julian hadn't changed. He had simply found a new victim for his ambition. At the reception, the trouble finally found them. Silas was pulled away by a group of dukes wanting to discuss trade routes, leaving Elara near the balcony. Within seconds, Julian was there. He looked disheveled, his golden hair messy, and his eyes bloodshot. "What game is this, Elara?" he hissed, grabbing her upper arm. "You think you can just show up here with a monster like Vane and pretend you're royalty? I know who you are. I know you're still the girl who cried when I left." Elara didn't pull away. She looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "You're hurting my arm, Julian. And you're making a scene at your own wedding. Is this the image you want for the High Duke's son-in-law?" Julian's grip tightened. "You're a liar? This is a stunt. Vane doesn't marry humans. He'll grow bored of you by sunrise and throw you to his dogs." Before Elara could respond, the air around them turned freezing. A shadow fell over Julian, massive and terrifying. "I believe the lady told you that you were hurting her," Silas said. His voice wasn't a growl, as it was something much worse, a calm, clinical promise of death. Silas stepped between them, his presence so overwhelming that Julian actually stumbled backward into a dessert table. "Julian Thorne," Silas said, his eyes now a dark, predatory orange. "You seem to be under the delusion that your past gives you some claim to my wife's attention. Let me disabuse you of that notion. If I see your hand on her again, if I even hear her name leave your mouth, I will treat it as a declaration of war against the North. And I don't think your new father-in-law wants to see his lands under 6 feet of snow and blood." Julian fled. He didn't just walk away, he retreated in a state of visible panic, leaving Elara and Silas alone on the balcony. Silas turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, his hands coming up to frame her face. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, his touch frantic and worried. "I'm fine," Elara whispered, her heart racing for an entirely different reason. "I'm fine, Silas. Thank you." Silas didn't let go. He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath hitching. "It wasn't pretend, Elara. What I said to him, it wasn't for the court. I haven't been pretending since the moment you sat at my table." Alara's breath caught. "Silas, we had a bargain." "The bargain is over," he murmured, his lips grazing hers. "I don't want a shield. I want you. I want the girl who walked into a wolf's den and demanded a king." He kissed her then, and it wasn't the polite, measured kiss of a public performance. It was a desperate, hungry thing that spoke of weeks of restrained desire. Elara reached up, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer as the world outside the balcony dissolved into nothingness. The return to the Ironreach Citadel was different. There were no more rehearsals, no more lessons in posture. Elara moved into the king's chambers permanently, her sewing kit sitting on a velvet ottoman next to Silas's war maps. The court, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, adjusted with surprising speed. Lady Mara began treating Elara with a genuine, if gruff, respect, and the guards no longer watched her like a mouse. They watched her like a queen. But the peace was short-lived. The Southern Reach, embarrassed by the display at the wedding and fearing the new strength of the North, began to whisper of rebellion. Lord Calloway sent a formal protest, claiming the marriage was a sham meant to disrupt the trade summit. Silas sat at the long table in the council chamber, the letter from the South crumpled in his fist. "They want proof," he growled, his eyes flashing amber. "They want a public consummation, or a blood bond ceremony. They're looking for any excuse to invalidate your title." "Then give them the ceremony," Elara said, stepping up behind him and placing her hands on his shoulders. Silas froze, his muscles relaxing under her touch. "A blood bond is permanent, Elara. It links our souls. If I am hurt, you feel it. If I die, you carry that wound forever. It's not a ruse you can walk away from." "I don't want to walk away," she said softly. "I've spent my life being the person people walk away from. I'm not leaving you, Silas. Not for the South, and not for anything else." Silas stood and turned, taking her hands in his. "Then we do it tonight. No court, no witnesses, just us and the old gods." They climbed to the highest peak of the citadel, where an ancient stone altar stood under the open sky. The wind was howling, whipping Alara's hair across her face, but she didn't feel the cold. Silas drew a silver dagger, the blade glinting in the moonlight. He pressed it to his palm, drawing a thin line of red, then did the same to hers. He pressed their palms together, and as their blood mingled, Elara felt a sensation like a bolt of lightning striking her heart. Images flashed before her eyes. Silas as a young boy, alone in the snow. Silas winning his first battle. The crushing weight of the crown he never wanted. And she felt him receiving her memories. The hunger of her childhood, the sting of Julian's betrayal, the moment she first saw Silas on his throne. It was an intimacy so profound it was almost painful. When it was over, Silas pulled her into his arms, his heart beating in perfect sync with hers. "You are mine now," he whispered into her hair, "and I am yours." The Southern Reach's rebellion died before it could even begin. When the news of the blood bond reached the courts, the whispers stopped. You couldn't fake a bond. The magic was woven into the very air around them. Julian Thorne's marriage, meanwhile, was a disaster. Lady Lessa eventually fled back to her father, and Julian was stripped of his titles for his failures in diplomacy. 6 months later, Elara sat in the library of the Citadel, stitching a pattern of silver wolves into a black silk banner. Silas was at his desk, but he wasn't looking at his maps. He was watching her, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. "Hot, you're making that face again," Elara said without looking up. "What face?" "The one where you're wondering how a seamstress became the most powerful woman in the North." Silas got up and walked over, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. "No," he murmured. "I'm wondering how I ever thought I was powerful before you walked through those doors." He pulled her up into his arms, and Elara let the banner fall to the floor. She had walked into the Ironreach Citadel to save her pride, but she had ended up saving a king. The snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in white, but inside the citadel, the fire was burning brighter than ever. If you've enjoyed this story of a bargain turned to true love, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's completely free, and it helps ensure you never miss a new chapter in these worlds of alphas and magic. Before you go, I have to ask, if you were in Elara's shoes, would you have taken the risk and called in a debt to the Alpha King? Or would you have found another way? I love reading your theories and thoughts, so let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. Where are you watching from today? Your comments are the lifeblood of this channel, and I can't wait to hear from you. See you in the next story.